Alexander Jackson folded his last shirt and put it in the bag. One bag, 18 years, and everything fit in one bag. The hallway was quiet, 6 in the morning. No one woke up to say goodbye. He didn't expect them to. He walked through town to the lawyer's office, past a family having breakfast at a diner, a mother wiping syrup off a kid's chin. He looked away. He'd learned not to look too long. The lawyer, Harold Pierce, pushed papers across the desk, standard aging out forms. Then he paused. "There's something else." He handed over an envelope. "Someone left you property. An orchard in Millbrook." Alexander stared at the name on the envelope. Eleanor Jackson. He didn't recognize it. But something stirred, faint. Almost nothing. The smell of apples in autumn. A warmth he couldn't place. "Who is she?" Harold looked at him. "Your grandmother. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're joining from today. Sometimes the smallest connections remind us we're not alone in this world." The bus ride took 4 hours. Alexander sat in the back row, watching concrete turn to fields. Fields turn to forest. Forest thin out into farmland. His bag sat on the seat beside him. No one asked to move it. No one got off at Millbrook. The station was a wooden bench under a rusted sign. He stood there for a moment, the afternoon sun warm on his face, then started walking. The town was small. A diner with a faded awning, a hardware store, its windows dusty, a post office with an American flag that had seen better days. People on the sidewalk glanced at him, a woman with grocery bags, an old man on a bench, but no one waved. No one spoke. He found the property at the edge of town, down a dirt road that hadn't been maintained in years. The fence was rotting, posts leaning at angles like tired old men. The gate hung open on one hinge, rusted in place. And behind it, the orchard. Rows of apple trees stretched back toward a small cottage. But the trees were dead. Gray bark, bare branches, twisted against the pale sky. Alexander walked between the rows, his footsteps loud on the hard ground. The soil was cracked and dry. Nothing grew here. Nothing had grown here for a long time. A crow landed on a branch ahead of him, black eyes watching. It flew away before he could take another step. The cottage was worse up close. Paint peeling in long strips, white gone to gray. One window cracked down the middle. The front door swollen in its frame he had to push hard, shoulder against wood, before it scraped open. Inside dust, thick in the air, coating everything. Furniture covered in white sheets, shapes he couldn't identify. The smell hit him old wood, mildew, and something else. Something faintly sweet, like fruit left too long in a bowl. He pulled a sheet off what turned out to be a couch, coughed at the cloud that rose up, sat down. This was it, his inheritance. A dead orchard and a house that was falling apart. He should leave in the morning, figure out how to sell this place, take whatever money he could get, and go somewhere else. But that night, walking through the dark living room, his foot hit a spot on the floor. It creaked, but not the normal creak of old wood. Hollow. The morning sun did nothing to make the orchard look better. Alexander stood on the porch, looking at the rows of dead trees, and decided he needed supplies if he was going to stay even one more night. Coffee, bread, something to keep him going while he figured out what to do with this place. He walked into town. The general store was small. cramped, smelling of sawdust and something like old apples. A woman behind the counter watched him from the moment the bell above the door jingled, gray hair pulled tight, glasses on a chain around her neck. "You're the one who got the Jackson place," she said, not a question. Alexander picked up a loaf of bread from the shelf. "Word travels fast. Small town." She didn't smile. "That orchard's been dead going on 5 years now. Eleanor let it go after she got sick. Nobody around here thought she had any family left." He didn't answer, just added a can of coffee to his pile, a tin of beans, some matches. 50 cents short, she said when he handed over his money. He dug into his pocket, found a quarter, pushed it across the counter. She stared at it, then at him. Waved her hand. "Go on, but don't make a habit of it." The diner was across the street. He needed something hot in his stomach. The bread and beans would keep. But his stomach was empty, and the coffee there smelled better than anything he could make in that dusty kitchen. He took a booth near the window, ordered coffee and eggs. The waitress, young, maybe his age, looked at him with curiosity but said nothing, just wrote down his order and walked away. The men at the corner table were not as quiet. 4 of them, 50s, 60s, flannel shirts, work boots, caps with feed store logos. They'd been talking when he walked in. Now they were talking louder, not trying to hide it. "Heard that dead orchard finally found a sucker." Laughter. One of them slapped the table. The coffee cups rattled. "Poor kid doesn't know what he stepped into." Eleanor was something else toward the end, talking to herself all hours. Said she was waiting for someone. Well, someone came. Another laugh. "Lot of good it'll do him." Alexander didn't turn around. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup when it arrived. The ceramic was hot against his palms. He focused on that. The heat, the smell, the steam rising and disappearing into the air. He'd heard worse. Foster homes taught you things. How to sit still while people talked about you like you weren't there. How to make yourself small. How to wait until it was over. But his jaw was tight, his shoulders hard against the vinyl seat. The eggs came. He ate without tasting them. "Mind if I sit down?" A man stood at his table, mid-40s, maybe. Black suit, expensive cut, no tie, clean-shaven face with a smile that showed a few too many teeth. He didn't belong here, not in this diner, not in this town. Everything about him said somewhere else. "Richard Cole." He slid into the booth across from Alexander without waiting for an answer. Folded his hands on the table like they were about to discuss something important. "I represent a development company interested in properties in this area. Heard you just came into some land." Alexander kept eating. "I know this must be overwhelming." Richard's voice was smooth, practiced. The kind of voice that had talked a lot of people into a lot of things. "Inheriting property you didn't know existed. From family you didn't know you had. That's a lot for anyone to handle. What do you want? To help you." Richard pulled a card from his inside pocket, slid it across the table. White, against the worn formica. "My company is prepared to offer $50,000 for the property. Cash, no complications. You could take that money, start fresh somewhere, build whatever kind of life you want. No one would think less of you for it." $50,000. Alexander had never had more than a few hundred at any one time. 50,000 was a new life. A real one. Somewhere far from here. "Think about it." Richard stood, buttoning his jacket. "But don't think too long. Offers like this don't wait around forever. He walked out. The bell above the door chimed, then went silent. Alexander stared at the card. White, black letters. A phone number with an area code he didn't recognize. The men in the corner had gone quiet. He could feel their eyes on the back of his neck now, waiting to see what the outsider would do, what the sucker would decide. He left money on the table for the eggs he hadn't finished. Walked out into the bright morning sun. The card was still in his hand. He could call right now, arrange a meeting, sign whatever papers needed signing, be gone from this place by tomorrow. That was the smart move, the logical one. He started walking back toward the orchard. Halfway there, he stopped, turned around. Someone had been watching him through the diner window. A woman, older, sitting alone at a table near the back. Gray hair, soft face, wearing a cardigan the color of faded roses. She hadn't been laughing with the others. She'd been looking at him differently, like she was trying to see something, like she recognized him from somewhere. He didn't know her, but something in the way she looked at him made him think she knew him, or knew something about him. The orchard gate creaked when he pushed it open. The dead trees stood in their rows, silent, watching him return like they'd known he would. He walked past them, up to the cottage, and stopped at the door. The card was still in his hand. $50,000. A way out. He should call. Take the money. Leave tonight. But his feet carried him inside, through the dusty living room, to the spot where the floor had sounded hollow the night before. He knelt down, ran his fingers along the edge of the wooden planks. There, one of them was raised slightly at the corner. Not much, just enough to feel if you were looking for it. He worked his fingernails into the gap, pulled. The plank came up with a groan of old nails. Beneath it, wrapped in cloth that had once been white, sat a metal box. Tin, maybe. Rusted at the corners, but still solid. Someone had put this here, hidden it on purpose. And on the top of the box, scratched into the metal in letters worn thin by time. 2 words, for Alexander. The lid was stuck. Rust had sealed the edges, fusing metal to metal over years of sitting in the dark beneath the floor. Alexander worked his fingernails into the gap, pulled. Nothing. He shifted his grip, pulled harder, and felt something give with a soft crack. The smell hit him first, old paper, ink that had dried decades ago. Something like lavender. Faint. Almost gone. Inside the box, a leather journal. Cracked along the spine from years of use. A bundle of letters tied with string that had gone brittle and yellow. Photographs. Black and white. Curled at the edges. And underneath it all, a small envelope. Thick. Heavy. He opened it. Cash. Maybe $2,000 in worn bills, held together with a rubber band that snapped when he touched it. A note in shaky handwriting. For getting started, she had left him money. His grandmother. A woman he'd never known had hidden cash under her floor, waiting for him to find it. He set the envelope aside and reached for the journal. The cover was soft, worn smooth by hands that had held it many times. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small, slanted to the right, unsteady in places. Written by someone whose hands didn't always do what they were told. March 15th, 1998. I saw him today. First day of kindergarten. He was wearing a blue jacket. Too big for him, probably handed down from some other child in the system. He stood at the gate for a long time before going in, looking around like he was waiting for someone to come. I was across the street. He didn't see me. I wanted to call out. I wanted to run to him and hold him and tell him everything. But I couldn't. Not yet. It's not safe. Alexander's throat tightened. He turned the page. September 3rd, 2001. Third foster home now. I found out through Mrs. Patterson at the county office. She thinks I'm just an old neighbor from the area, asking after children in the system out of Christian charity. She doesn't know who I really am. She said he's doing fine. Quiet. But fine. Quiet. That word sat heavy in my chest all night long. I should have found a way to keep him. I should have tried harder. But they would have come. They would have found us both. And what happened to his parents? The entry stopped there. The next line was crossed out. Ink pressed so hard it had torn through the paper. He turned more pages. Dates jumped forward. 2005, 2010, 2015. Each entry mentioned him, his schools, his foster placements, things she had no business knowing but somehow did. She had been watching him for years. From a distance, he never knew existed. June 22nd, 2018. I can't come to you now. Not safe yet. But one day, you'll find your way here. I'm making sure of that. The orchard will be yours. Everything I couldn't give you while I was alive. I'll leave for you to find. One day. You'll understand why I had to stay away. I hope you'll forgive me. He closed the journal. His hands were shaking. Not from the cold. A knock at the door made him flinch. He stood too fast. The journal fell to the floor, pages splaying open against the dusty wood. He stared at the door. Another knock, softer this time. Almost hesitant. He crossed the room. Opened it. The woman from the diner stood on the porch. Gray hair. Kind face. The same faded cardigan she'd been wearing that morning. In her hands, a dish covered with a checkered cloth napkin. Didn't mean to startle you. Her voice was warm, unhurried. The kind of voice that had been saying comforting things for a long time. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I live about a half-mile down the road. Been Eleanor's neighbor for, Lord knows, 30 years now. She held out the dish. Saw the lights on last night. First time in near 6 months anyone's been in this house. Figured whoever was here might need something to eat besides beans from a can. Alexander took the dish. It was warm through the bottom. Biscuits, from the smell. Fresh ones. Thank you, but Sarah nodded. She didn't try to push past him into the house. Didn't ask to come in. Just stood there on the porch, looking at him with eyes that had seen a lot of years pass by. You look like her, she said after a moment. Eleanor, something around the eyes, the way you hold yourself, too, careful-like, watching for trouble before it comes. He didn't know what to say to that. She talked about you. You know. Sarah's voice dropped a little. Quieter now. More private. All those last years. Said you'd come back someday. Said she was getting everything ready for when you did. Ready for what? Sarah smiled. Sat and soft. Like someone remembering something that still hurt. I reckon that's not my story to tell. Eleanor had her reasons for everything, even when they didn't make sense to the rest of us. But I know she left things for you. Made sure they'd be here when you needed them. Alexander stood in the doorway, holding the warm dish, the photographs and letters scattered on the floor behind him. The journal opened to a page he hadn't finished reading. Why couldn't she just come to me? The question came out before he could stop it, raw, unguarded. She was watching me for years. She knew where I was. Why didn't she ever come get you? Sarah shook her head slowly. It wasn't that simple, child. There were people involved, circumstances, things that happened before you were born, things that cast long shadows over everything that came after. She stepped back from the porch. You can sell this place if that's what you decide. Take the money from that man in the suit and go live your life somewhere else. Nobody in this town would blame you for it. She turned to walk away, then stopped, looked back at the cottage like she was seeing through the walls to something beyond, something Alexander couldn't see yet. But if you stay long enough, she said, you'll understand why Eleanor couldn't come to you herself, why she spent her whole life watching from a distance, and why she worked so hard to make sure you'd find your way back here when the time was right. She walked down the path, through the gate, and disappeared down the road without looking back. Alexander stood there until the dust from her footsteps had settled. Then he went back inside, picked up the journal from where it had fallen, found the page where the entry had been crossed out. The ink pressed so hard it tore through. He held it up to the light coming through the cracked window, through the heavy black lines, faint but readable if you looked hard enough. 3 words. They killed them. Alexander didn't sleep that night. He sat on the floor of the cottage with the journal open in his lap. An oil lamp he'd found in the kitchen casting yellow light across the pages. The entries stretched back decades. His grandmother's handwriting changed over the years, steadier in the early ones, shakier as time went on, but the subject never wavered. Him. October 12th, 2003. He's in a new school again. 4th one now. I drove past yesterday afternoon, parked my car across the street during recess. He was sitting alone on a bench while all the other children played. He had a book in his lap, couldn't see what it was from that distance. But he wasn't reading. He was watching the others, learning how to be invisible. I know that look. I taught myself the same thing, a long time ago. I wanted to get out of the car, walk across that playground and tell him who I am, tell him he's not alone in this world. But I stayed where I was, started the engine, drove away. It's not safe yet. They're still out there, still watching. Who was watching? Alexander turned more pages, searching for answers. The entries mentioned them, often a company, a threat. Shadows from before he was born, but never gave names, never explained fully. February 3rd, 2009. Made a decision today. If I can't be with him, I can at least make sure he has somewhere to come back to. Someday, when all of this is finally over, I'm going to save everything I can, the orchard, the house, the truth. When he's old enough, when the danger has passed, I'll find a way to bring him here, and I'll tell him everything he deserves to know. I just pray I live long enough to see his face. Alexander's chest ached, a pressure behind his ribs that wouldn't ease no matter how he shifted or breathed. She had wanted him. All those years in foster homes, all those nights lying awake in strange beds, wondering why nobody ever came, wondering what was so wrong with him that no one wanted to keep him. And she had been out there, watching, waiting, unable to reach him, but never looking away. But why? He read until the lamp oil ran low and the light began to flicker, until the words blurred together and his eyes burned from strain. The later entries grew more fragmented, sentences that trailed off mid-thought, pages left completely blank. Then Near the very end, June 15th, 2023. The doctors told me today. 6 months. Maybe less if I'm unlucky. I won't get to see him. I've made my peace with that now. But he'll come here after I'm gone. He'll find what I left behind. And he'll understand. I have to believe he'll understand. I did everything I could. Alexander. I did everything I knew how to do. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before she died. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I loved him every single day. Tell him the orchard isn't dead, it's just waiting. Like I was. Like he was. Waiting for the right time to grow. Alexander closed the journal. His hands were cold, even though the room wasn't. He reached for the photographs next. The ones from the tin box. Still scattered across the floor where he'd left them. The first photograph, a young woman with dark hair, standing in front of a house. This house, the cottage, but looking new. Fresh paint on the walls, glass whole in every window, flowers growing in boxes beneath them. The woman was smiling, one hand resting on her rounded stomach, pregnant. He turned it over, on the back, written in pencil that had faded almost to nothing, Margaret. 7 months along. Summer, 1997. Margaret, his mother. A woman he had no memory of, reduced to a faded image and a name. The second photograph, the same woman, older now, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. A man stood beside her dark hair, tired eyes, a smile that looked real. On the back, Margaret and David with Alexander, 3 months old. His parents, both of them, alive and young and holding him like he was something precious. He'd never seen pictures of them before. The foster system had files, paperwork, official documents, but no photographs, just names typed on forms. Now here they were. Real people. His people. The last photograph was different from the others. Grainier. Taken from far away and zoomed in so much that the edges had gone soft and blurry. A child, maybe 6 or 7, standing outside a school building, wearing a blue jacket that was too big, sleeves hanging past his wrists, a backpack on his shoulders that looked like it weighed more than he did. Alexander recognized the jacket. He remembered that weight. She had taken this picture. His grandmother, standing across the street, watching him walk into school alone. And she had lifted a camera and captured the moment so she could keep him close in the only way she was allowed. His hands shook as he set the photograph down. She had been there, right there, close enough to see his face, to call his name, to run across the street and take him away from all of it. And she hadn't. He didn't know if that made him feel loved or abandoned. Both. Maybe. Neither. Something new that didn't have a name. When morning came, gray light creeping through the cracked window, he walked outside. The orchard looked the same as it had the day before. Dead trees. Dry ground. Silence heavy as dirt. But he walked into the rows anyway, moving slower this time, looking closer than he had before. The first tree was dead, bark peeling away, branches brittle enough to snap. He touched the trunk, and a piece crumbled under his fingers like old bread. The second tree the same. The third. He stopped, crouched down, at the base of the trunk, half buried under dead leaves and dried grass. Something caught his eye, a color that didn't belong here. He brushed the debris away with his hand. Green. Faint, barely there. More gray than green if he was being honest, but alive. A small shoot pushing up through the cracked soil, reaching toward the light. He moved to the next tree. Checked the base. Nothing. The one after that, nothing. But the fifth one had something too. Another shoot. Smaller than the first, but unmistakably growing. He walked the entire orchard that morning. Most of the trees were truly dead past saving, past hope. But scattered through the rows, here and there, he found them. Small signs of life hiding beneath the decay. Green pushing through gray. Not all of them, not even most, but some. The orchard wasn't completely gone. It was damaged and neglected and nearly finished, but not dead, not yet. He was still crouched beside a tree when he heard the car. The engine was wrong for this road. Too smooth, too quiet, too expensive. He stood and turned toward the gate. Richard Cole's black sedan pulled up to the fence. The door opened. "Still here?" Richard stepped out, his shoes too clean for the dirt path. He walked toward the orchard with his hands in his pockets, that same practiced smile on his face. "I figured you might have called me by now." "I haven't decided anything." "Fair enough." Richard stopped a few feet away. His eyes moved across the dead trees, the sagging cottage. Back to Alexander. "I came to improve my offer. 75,000. That's as high as my company is willing to go." "Why do you want this land so badly?" Richard's smile didn't waver. "Development potential, location, standard business considerations." He paused. "But I'll be straight with you, son. There are things about this property, about your grandmother, that you might not want to dig into too deep." Alexander said nothing. "Folks around here have long memories." Richard's voice dropped. Almost friendly now. Almost concerned. "Eleanor made some enemies over the years. Said things about people that weren't true. Caused trouble where there didn't need to be any." He shrugged. "I'm not saying she was a bad person, just saying not everyone saw her the way you might want them to." The words hung in the air. "Think about it." Richard turned back toward his car. 75,000 buys a lot of fresh starts, a lot of distance from whatever mess she left behind. He opened his door, then paused, looked back over his shoulder. "Oh, and if you find anything interesting in that house, old papers, letters, that kind of thing." His smile thinned. "Might be worth talking to me before you show them to anyone else. Some things are better left buried." He got in the car and drove away. Alexander stood alone in the orchard, surrounded by dead trees and a few small green shoots that had no business surviving. Richard knew something. About Eleanor. About this land. About whatever had kept her watching from a distance for 20 years. And he didn't want Alexander to find out what it was. He started the next morning before the sun was fully up. Alexander found tools in the shed behind the cottage, a shovel with a cracked handle, pruning shears rusted at the hinge, a wheelbarrow with a flat tire that he didn't bother trying to fix. He carried water from the well in buckets, 2 at a time, the rope rough against his palms. The green shoots he'd found gave him something he hadn't felt in years. A reason to get up, a direction to move. Something to do besides wait for the next bad thing to happen. He cleared dead leaves from around the living trees first, pulled weeds that had grown thick and tangled between the rows, cut away branches that had rotted through. The dry wood snapping under the shears like old bones. By noon, his shirt was soaked through with sweat. By evening, His shoulders ached so badly he could barely lift his arms above his head. But he kept going. He walked to town the next day and bought supplies from the hardware store fertilizer. A new hose. Work gloves that the woman behind the counter sold him, without comment or question. He used some of the cash Eleanor had left him, counting out the bills carefully, trying to make it stretch, back at the orchard. He read articles on his phone about apple tree care, soil restoration, drought recovery. Most of what he found wasn't encouraging. Trees this far gone rarely came back. The root systems were probably dead. The soil was depleted beyond saving. But some articles mentioned exceptions, trees that seemed finished but weren't, dormant instead of dead, waiting underground for the right conditions. It happened sometimes, not often, but sometimes. He held on to that. The first 3 days. He worked from before sunrise until after dark, watering each tree individually, mixing fertilizer into the soil around the bases, hoping something, anything, would take. His hands blistered on the second day, raw patches forming on his palms that stung every time he gripped the shovel or pulled the hose. He wrapped them in strips torn from an old sheet he found in the cottage and kept working. On the 4th day, he checked the shoots. They looked the same, maybe slightly bigger. He couldn't tell. He wanted them to be bigger. So he wasn't sure if he was seeing what was really there or what he needed to see. By the 5th day, his body was starting to fail. His lower back seized when he bent to lift a bucket, pain shooting down his leg so sharp he had to stand still for a full minute before he could move again. His legs trembled on the walk back from the well. He dropped a full bucket, water spilling across the dry ground, and stood there watching it soak in and disappear. Gone. Just like that. He refilled the bucket, kept going. The 6th day brought clouds. No rain, just gray sky pressing down, heavy and still, making the air thick and hard to breathe. Alexander worked anyway, moving slower now, each motion costing more than it had the day before. His blisters had broken open and formed again, the skin underneath raw and weeping. The gloves stuck to his palms when he pulled them off at night, dried blood gluing fabric to flesh. On the 7th day, he checked the shoots again. His stomach dropped. The first one, the one he'd found that morning in the orchard. The one that had given him hope when he had none, was wilting. The green had faded to yellow at the edges. The leaves, barely formed to begin with, were curling inward like they were trying to protect themselves from something. He moved to the next tree, the same, and the next, worse. They were dying. He stood in the middle of the orchard, dirt under his fingernails, sweat cooling on his skin in the gray afternoon light. Around him, rows of dead trees stretched in every direction. The shoots he'd pinned everything on were giving up, fading away right in front of him. A week of work, every muscle in his body screaming, hands torn apart, and nothing to show for it. Nothing at all. He walked back to the cottage, sat down on the porch steps, didn't go inside. The sun set behind the clouds somewhere. Invisible, just a gradual darkening of the gray, until everything was the same shade of nothing. The orchard disappeared into shadow. Alexander sat there without moving as the air grew cold around him. He'd tried. For the first time in his life, he'd actually tried. Not just survived, not just waited for the next bad thing to happen so he could endure it. He'd put everything he had into something, given it all he knew how to give. And it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The thoughts came slowly at first, then faster, tumbling over each other. All the foster homes, all the times he'd let himself hope, just a little bit, that this family might be different. This school, this town, this time, and every single time, the same ending. Packing his bag, moving on, learning not to want things because wanting only made the losing hurt worse. He'd thought maybe this could be different. The grandmother he never knew. The land she'd left him, the journal full of words that said she loved him, even from far away. But love didn't make dead trees grow. Love didn't change the fact that he was sitting alone in the dark on a rotting porch in a town where people laughed at him behind his back. Love didn't fix anything. Richard Cole's card was in his pocket. He'd been carrying it for days now, taking it out sometimes just to look at the number. $75,000. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up bright in the darkness, hurting his eyes. He stared at the card, then at the keypad. His thumb moved. 7, 5, 5. Footsteps on the path made him stop. He looked up. A figure was walking toward the cottage, moving slowly in the darkness. He couldn't see who it was until she stepped into the faint light coming from the cottage window. Sarah Mitchell. "Saw you out here last night," she said. Her voice was quiet, no judgment in it. "Sitting on these steps in the dark, figured you might be getting close to giving up." Alexander didn't answer, didn't put the phone away either. Sarah climbed the porch steps and sat down beside him, close enough that he could smell lavender and something like fresh bread. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just sat there with him, looking out at the dark orchard. "Eleanor almost gave up too, you know." Sarah's voice was soft. "More than once. This place nearly broke her heart a dozen times over. But she kept going, kept holding on. Why? Because she was waiting for you." Sarah turned to look at him. "And because she knew something you don't know yet. Something she wrote down. Near the end. When she knew she wasn't going to make it." Alexander's hand tightened around the phone. "There's a page in that journal you haven't found yet," Sarah said. "Sewn into the back cover, hidden in the lining. She told me about it a few weeks before she passed, said to tell you about it if you ever looked like you were about to walk away." She stood up slowly, her knees cracking in the cold air. "I can't tell you what to do, child. That's your choice to make. But before you make it..." She nodded toward the cottage, toward the journal still sitting on the table inside. "Maybe you should read what she wanted you to find when you needed it most." She walked away, without waiting for an answer. Alexander sat there in the dark, the phone still glowing in his hand. The number half dialed. Then he stood up, went inside, found the journal, and reached for the back cover. The back cover of the journal was thicker than the front. Alexander ran his fingers along the edge, feeling for what Sarah had described. There a ridge beneath the leather, something hidden underneath. He found the corner where the lining had been glued down and pulled. The glue was old, brittle. It gave way with a soft tearing sound. Between the leather and the cardboard backing, a single folded page. Different paper than the journal, thinner, newer, written more recently than the entries he'd already read. He unfolded it with shaking hands. "My dear Alexander, if you're reading this, you've almost given up. I know because I almost gave up too. Many times, more than I can count. But I need you to understand something before you make your choice. I didn't leave you because I didn't love you. I left because if I stayed close, They would have found you, too. The handwriting was steadier here than in the later journal entries. This had been written earlier, before the tremors got bad, before the end came close. Your parents didn't die in a car accident. They were murdered. I know you've seen the letter by now, the one from March 1997. You know about Hartwell Development, about the aquifer beneath this land, about what they did to Margaret and David when they wouldn't sell. What you don't know is what happened after. I tried to take you. Lord knows I tried. I hired lawyers, filed for custody, spent every penny I had fighting to bring you home. But Hartwell had connections I didn't. They made sure the paperwork got lost. Made sure I looked unstable, a grieving mother making wild accusations with no proof. They told the courts I was dangerous, that I'd fill your head with conspiracy theories, that you'd be better off in the system than with me. The judge believed them. And I lost you. Alexander's vision blurred. He blinked hard, forced himself to keep reading. After that, I had a choice. I could keep fighting, keep drawing attention to myself, to you, and risk them deciding you were a loose end that needed tying up. Or I could disappear, watch you from a distance, keep you safe by staying away. I chose your life over my heart. But I never stopped watching, never stopped hoping, never stopped planning for the day when you'd be old enough, when the danger would pass, when I could finally bring you home. I tried once, when you were 12 years old. I drove all the way to your foster home, sat in my car outside for 3 hours. I was ready to take you, ready to face whatever came. Then I saw the black sedan parked down the street, same one that had followed me before. After all those years, they were still watching, still waiting to see if I'd lead them to you. I drove away, and I never tried again. The page trembled in his hands. I know you're angry. I know you feel abandoned. You have every right to feel that way. But please understand everything I did. I did for you. Every day I stayed away was a day I kept you safe. Every birthday I missed. Every Christmas I spent alone. Every time I watched you from across the street and couldn't call your name, all of it was to protect you. The orchard isn't just land. It's proof. Beneath the east corner, near the old well, I buried everything. Documents, recordings, evidence of what Hartwell did not just to your parents, but to others. Families who wouldn't sell. People who got in the way. They changed their name after the scandal in 2005. They're called Meridian Holdings now. The man who came to see you, Richard Cole, works for them. They've been waiting for me to die so they could finally get this land. They don't know what's buried here. They just want the aquifer. You have a choice now. You can sell. Take the money and walk away. No one would blame you. Or you can stay. Dig up what I buried. Finish what I couldn't. I won't tell you which to choose. I've already taken too much from you. But know this, whatever you decide. I loved you. Every day of your life. I loved you. From across the street. From the next town over. From a distance that broke my heart into pieces I never could put back together. You were never abandoned. Alexander, you were protected. Forgive me if you can. Your grandmother, Eleanor. He read it 3 times. The words blurred, sharpened, blurred again. Then he stood up. His legs felt disconnected from his body. The room was too small. The walls were too close. He needed air. He stumbled out the door, down the porch steps, into the orchard. The night was cold and wet. It had rained while he was reading. The ground sucked at his shoes. He couldn't see where he was going. Didn't care. All those years, all those foster homes, the nights lying awake, wondering what was wrong with him, why nobody wanted him, why he'd been thrown away like something broken and worthless, and she'd been there, watching, wanting him, unable to reach him, because of money, because of land, because some company decided water rights were worth more than 2 lives, worth more than a child growing up alone. His foot caught on a root. He went down hard. His hands sank into cold mud up to his wrists. His knees hit the ground with a shock that rattled his teeth. The rain from the past days had pooled here between the rows, turning the soil to black sludge that smelled of rot and old leaves. He didn't get up. He stayed there, on his hands and knees in the mud, breathing hard. The cold seeped through his jeans, his palms, into his bones, mud on his face where he'd tried to wipe his eyes, mud in his hair, mud everywhere. And then the thought came, the one he'd been pushing away since he first opened that journal. She had watched him for 20 years, and she had done nothing. He understood why now. He'd read the letter. He knew the danger was real. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. Understanding didn't erase the memory of being 7 years old, standing at a school gate in an oversized jacket, waiting for someone who never came. She could have found a way, could have tried harder, could have risked it, but she'd chosen safety, chosen distance, chosen to let him suffer alone rather than take a chance. He let his head drop, felt the cold mud against his forehead, let it hold him there, pressed into the earth like something buried. What kind of man kneels in the mud in the middle of the night, crying over a woman he never knew? What kind of pathetic, broken thing had he become? The shame burned worse than the cold, worse than the grief. He'd spent his whole life trying not to need anyone, trying not to want anything, trying to be strong enough to survive on his own. And here he was, face down in the dirt, destroyed by a few pages of handwriting from a dead woman. He didn't know how long he stayed there. Minutes, maybe longer. The cold seeped deeper. His arms started to shake. Then he heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming through the mud. Alexander. Sarah's voice. She must have come back. Must have been watching. I know it hurts. Her footsteps stopped somewhere behind him. I know it feels like the worst kind of betrayal, loving someone who couldn't be there, being protected by someone who had to stay away. He couldn't look at her, couldn't let her see him like this, covered in mud, broken open, nothing left of whatever dignity he'd managed to hold on to. She tried once, you know. Sarah's voice was quiet. When you were 12, drove all the way there, sat outside for hours. She was ready to take you and run. I know. His voice came out, cracked, raw. I read it. Then you know why she left. Why she never tried again. Sarah paused. They would have killed her. Alexander. And then they would have come for you. She chose to live with a broken heart so you could live at all. He pushed himself up out of the mud. His arms shook, his whole body shook. But he got to his knees. Then to his feet. Sarah was standing a few yards away, wrapped in a coat, her face barely visible in the darkness. She left you more than land, Sarah said. She left you the truth, and a choice about what to do with it. Alexander looked down at his hands, black with mud, shaking with cold. Then he looked out at the orchard, at the rows of dead trees standing silent in the darkness, at the cottage with its single light burning in the window. She had spent her whole life protecting him from a distance, watching him grow up alone, carrying a grief she could never share, and she had left him this, a place to come back to, a truth to uncover, a chance to finish what she couldn't. He wiped his face with the back of his muddy hand, took a breath, then another. "Where's the well?" he asked. "The old one, on the east side." Sarah's eyes met his in the darkness. "I'll show you in the morning," she said. "When you're ready." The old well stood at the east corner of the orchard, half hidden by overgrown brush and fallen branches. Alexander found it at dawn, following Sarah's directions from the night before. A stone circle, covered with rotting boards, surrounded by weeds that had grown waist-high. 20 paces east, 3 feet down. He started digging. The soil was harder here than in the rest of the orchard, compacted by years of neglect. Each shovel stroke sent a shock up his arms into his shoulders. His blisters from the past week screamed with every grip. He ignored them. 1 foot down. The shovel scraped through clay and rock, 2 feet down. His shirt soaked through with sweat despite the morning cold. 3 feet down. The shovel hit something solid. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the dirt with his bare hands. His fingers found the edge of a metal box larger than the tin that had held the journal and letters. Heavier. He worked it free from the earth, dirt falling away in clumps. Inside manila folders, thick with papers, photographs, a tape recorder, old, the kind that used cassettes, and a cassette tape, labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. Hartwell, CEO. Phone call, March 1997. Evidence. Everything she'd spent decades protecting. He carried the box back to the cottage and set it on the table. Opened the first folder. Read. Contracts with forged signatures, threatening letters sent to families who wouldn't sell, police reports that had been altered or made to disappear, photographs of cars with damaged bumpers, the same kind of damage that would come from running someone off a road, and at the bottom of the stack, a newspaper clipping from 1997. 2 photos side by side. Margaret and David Jackson. The headline, "Local couple dies in single car accident on Highway 12. Single car. No other vehicle involved. Case closed." Alexander stared at his parents' faces for a long time. The sound of a car engine broke the silence. He walked to the window. Richard Cole's black sedan was pulling up to the gate. The door opened. Alexander went outside to meet him. "Morning." Richard walked toward the cottage, hands in his pockets, that same smooth smile on his face. But something was different today. A tightness around his eyes, an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. "I heard you've been busy, digging around in places you probably shouldn't be. Word travels fast. Small town." Richard stopped a few feet away. His eyes moved to the cottage door, like he was trying to see through it. "I came to make one final offer, 85,000. That's more than this place is worth by any reasonable measure." "No." Richard's smile flickered. "You haven't even thought about it." "I don't need to. Listen to me." Richard stepped closer. His voice dropped, losing its practiced smoothness. "Your grandmother was not a well woman. Everyone in this town will tell you the same thing. She spent her last years making wild accusations, seeing conspiracies everywhere, talking about things that never happened." Alexander said nothing. Whatever you found in that house, whatever papers, whatever recordings, they don't prove anything. They're the delusions of a sick old woman who couldn't let go of the past. Richard's jaw tightened. You could take them to the police, to a newspaper, to anyone you want, and you know what would happen. Nothing. Because the people who matter already know the truth. And the truth is that Eleanor Jackson lost her mind. Is that what Meridian Holdings told you to say? Richard's face went still. I know who you work for. Alexander kept his voice level, calm. I know what they did to my parents, and I know why they want this land so badly. Silence stretched between them. You're making a mistake. Richard's voice had gone cold. A very serious mistake. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Maybe not. But I'm not selling. Richard stared at him. The smile was completely gone now. What remained underneath was something harder, something that didn't pretend to be friendly. You'll regret this. He turned and walked back toward his car, stopped with his hand on the door. You'll fail. You know. Just like this place failed, just like your grandmother failed. You'll pour everything you have into this land, and it will give you nothing in return. Alexander looked at him, at the expensive suit, the clean hands, the eyes that had never lost anything that mattered. My grandmother didn't fail, he said. She built this place. She protected it for 30 years. She kept records of everything your company did, every family you threatened, every accident that wasn't an accident, and she made sure it would all come out when she was gone. Richard's hand tightened on the car door. That's not failure. Alexander's voice was quiet, steady. That's patience. And now I'm going to finish what she started. Richard got in the car, slammed the door. The engine roared to life, and he pulled away fast. Tires throwing gravel, Alexander watched until the car disappeared down the road. Then he went back inside, picked up the phone, found the number for a journalist in the city a woman Sarah had told him about. Someone who covered corporate corruption. Someone outside of Meridian's reach. He made the call, explained what he had, answered her questions as best he could. This is going to take time, the journalist said. Months, maybe longer. Federal investigations don't move fast. I'm not going anywhere. After he hung up, he walked back out to the orchard. The shoots he'd been trying to save still looked weak. Some had wilted further. Others were holding on, neither growing nor dying. Just waiting. He picked up the hose, started watering. Not rushing this time, not desperate. Just steady, patient. The way his grandmother had been patient for 30 years. The days turned into weeks. He worked the orchard every morning, checked the shoots, watered the trees that might still be alive, cut away the ones that were truly dead, clearing space for whatever might grow in the future. Tom at the hardware store started nodding when Alexander came in. The woman at the general store stopped charging him extra. One morning, a man from down the road showed up with a truckload of good soil, said he'd heard about the kid trying to bring the old Jackson place back to life. Figured he might need it. Alexander didn't ask how the man knew, just said thank you and got to work. 2 weeks after Richard Cole's last visit, Alexander was watering the row nearest the cottage, late afternoon sun coming through the branches, warm on his back. His hands had finally stopped hurting. The calluses were thick now, permanent. He almost missed it. A flash of color at the base of a tree he'd given up on days ago. He stopped, set down the hose, walked over, crouched down. A leaf, small, green, unfurling from a branch he'd been sure was dead. He reached out and touched it, gently, afraid it might not be real. It was warm from the sun, soft, alive. One leaf, on one branch, on one tree. It wasn't much. It wasn't proof that anything would survive. It wasn't a promise that the orchard would come back, or that the investigation would succeed, or that any of this would matter in the end. But it was there, growing against all odds. Alexander sat back on his heels and looked at it for a long time. A year passed. The orchard looked different now. Not transformed that would take more years, maybe decades, but different. Alive in places where it hadn't been before, green pushing through gray, branch by branch, row by row. Alexander walked between the trees in the early morning light, checking each one the way he did every day. His boots left prints in the soft spring soil. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, apple blossoms. Faint, but unmistakable, coming from a handful of trees that had decided to bloom. Not all of them, not even most. Maybe a dozen out of the whole orchard had come back strong enough to flower. The rest were still recovering, or still dead, or somewhere in between, showing leaves, but no fruit, showing life, but no promise. He'd learned not to count, not to keep track of wins and losses, just to show up every morning. Water, prune, wait. The calluses on his hands had thickened into permanent ridges, the skin tough enough now that he didn't need gloves for most work. His shoulders had broadened from months of carrying buckets and swinging tools. His face had tanned from the sun, and when he caught his reflection in the cottage window, he sometimes didn't recognize himself. The boy who had stepped off that bus a year ago was gone. Someone else stood in his place. He reached the tree closest to the cottage, the one that had shown the first leaf, all those months ago. It had a full crown of leaves now, and clusters of small white blossoms on 3 of its branches. Not many, but enough. He touched the bark, felt the roughness under his fingers, the life pulsing underneath. Coming along. He turned. Sarah was walking up the path from the road, a basket in her hands the way she always seemed to have. She came by most mornings now, sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk about nothing important. He'd stopped being surprised by her visits. Slowly, he said. That's how good things happen. She climbed the porch steps and set the basket down. Biscuits, from the smell, fresh from the oven. You eat anything yet this morning? Coffee. Lord knows that's not food. She patted the space on the step beside her. Sit down, rest a minute. The trees aren't going anywhere. He sat. The wood was warm from the early sun. Sarah handed him a biscuit wrapped in a cloth napkin, still hot enough to feel through the fabric. Heard from that journalist again, she said. The one in the city. Alexander nodded, chewing. She called last week. Says the investigation is moving to the federal level now. Grand jury, maybe. Could take another year. But she thinks there's enough to build a real case. Good. Sarah looked out at the orchard. Eleanor would be pleased. They sat in silence for a while. The morning sounds filled the space between them, birds calling from the trees, wind moving through the new leaves, a tractor humming somewhere far down the road. Tom asked about you yesterday, Sarah said. At the hardware store. Said you've been buying fence posts again. Deer keep getting into the south section. He said you knew what you were doing. Said you'd done your research. Learned the land. She glanced at him with something like pride in her eyes. That's high praise from Tom. He doesn't warm up to outsiders easy. I'm still an outsider. Less than you were. Sarah brushed crumbs from her lap. People notice, you know. When someone stays, when they work, when they don't give up just because things get hard. Alexander didn't answer. He took another bite of biscuit butter and salt, still warm, and watched a robin hop between the rows, searching for worms in the soft earth. I fixed the porch roof last month, he said after a while. That section that was leaking over the bedroom. I saw, and the well pump, that took most of a week, had to order parts from 2 counties away. I heard. He looked at her. Why are you smiling? Because you're listing things. Her eyes crinkled at the corners. Things you built, things you fixed. You're proud of them, even if you won't say it straight out. He turned back to the orchard. She was right. He was proud. Not in a way he would ever say out loud, but there, underneath, quiet and solid as the ground beneath his feet. I never built anything before, he said. Never stayed anywhere long enough to try. And now, he thought about it. The cottage with its new roof and new windows, the trees with their new leaves, the documents sitting in a federal prosecutor's office somewhere, waiting to bring justice to people who thought they'd gotten away with murder. Now I have a place to be. Sarah nodded. She didn't say anything else, just sat with him on the porch, watching the morning light spread across the orchard like something being born. Later, after she'd gone home, Alexander walked through the rows one more time. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him of the blossoms on the strongest trees. The shadows grew long across the ground. Some trees had leaves, some had flowers, some were still bare, still waiting, still deciding whether to live or die. He stopped in the middle of the orchard, looked around. This place was his. Not because someone had given it to him, not really. Not in the way that mattered. It was his because he had stayed, because he had worked, because he had chosen it, over and over, every single day, even when walking away would have been easier. His grandmother had given him the land, but he had made it home. The cottage behind him had lights in the windows now. He'd run electricity 3 months ago, hired a man from town to help with the wiring. The windows were new, too, replaced one by one as he could afford them. The south wall still needed painting. But he would get to that. Eventually. There was time. He thought about Eleanor, about the years she had spent watching him from a distance, unable to reach him, unwilling to put him in danger. She had made a choice. His safety over her heart. And she had lived with that choice for 20 years. He understood now, not all of it, maybe never all of it, but enough. She hadn't abandoned him. She had protected him. And when she couldn't protect him anymore, she had left him this a place to come home to, a truth to uncover, a chance to build something that mattered. The sky darkened. Stars appeared, scattered across the deepening blue. Alexander stood in the orchard, surrounded by trees that were learning to live again, and breathed. There was still work to do. Years of it. Probably. The investigation. The orchard. The cottage. The life he was building. Piece by piece, day by day. Nothing was finished. Nothing was certain. But for the first time he could remember, he wasn't afraid of what came next. He had a place. He had a purpose. He had roots, not the ones he'd been born with, but the ones he'd chosen, the ones he'd planted himself. The wind moved through the trees, rustling the new leaves. Alexander closed his eyes and listened. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this. Something that settles in the chest and doesn't ask to be explained. It may feel heavy, it may feel tender, it may feel strangely familiar, like a memory we didn't know we were carrying. Many of us have known what it is to feel unseen, to wait for someone who never came, to love from a distance, or to be loved from a distance, without ever knowing it. Some of us have carried things quietly for years, grief that never fully lifted, questions that never got answered, a longing for home that we couldn't name. These things don't need to be fixed. The old aches don't need to disappear for us to keep going. It's all right to hold them gently, to let them rest beside whatever else we've gathered along the way. Not everything needs an ending. Not everything needs to make sense. Sometimes just staying is enough. Just showing up, day after day, even when the ground is hard and the work is slow. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.